Meg Heights. I'm the project manager for Beyond the Headlines, a program of Wisconsin Humanities. I have my notes here because I get nervous in front of groups of people that look as wonderful as you. Beyond the Headlines is a program of Wisconsin Humanities. It's funded in part by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities. The point of Beyond the Headlines is to shine knowledge of and confront our largest issues by bringing citizens and journalists together. Beyond the Headlines is also enabled by a number of different partners in kind, and I'm going to go through a long list. We rely on local and statewide partners. We want to thank Crossroads at Big Creek for hosting us here today. The New News Lab, which is a consortium of Northeast Wisconsin news media, Wisconsin Watch, Wisconsin Public Radio, Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, Wisconsin Newspapers, Emergency Management, Wisconsin DNR, Wisconsin Green Fire, Wisconsin Historical Society, the UW Center for Journalism Ethics, UW Life Sciences Communication, Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife Commission, the Wisconsin Historical Society, and Midwest Environmental Advocates. Our moderator today is Mario Karan. He is an award-winning journalist. He's been a West Coast correspondent for The Guardian, USA, and Voice of San Diego, and his work has appeared in the New York Times and Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And we're going to show you a short video based on some of the reporting he's done for Imperiled Shores series, and then he's going to open it up to our panelists. Thank you.
Mike Carr, owner of Death Store Marine on Washington Island, said he hasn't seen Lake Michigan's water levels swing quite this rapidly. 8 years ago, he and his crew dredged sand from the lake bottom to accommodate boats, but as water levels surged to a record high last year, property owners flooded Carr with calls as they rushed to install barriers to keep the waves from eroding their beaches. While Carr's business is booming, he's not celebrating the burden for his neighbors. Unlike the oceans, whose waters are rising with temperatures, Great Lakes levels have tended to fluctuate in cycles, swinging up or down roughly every 3 to 10 years. But Great Lakes shoreline residents are now living through the most dramatic shifts in their lifetimes. Between record low waters in 2013 and a record high in 2020, Lakes Michigan and Huron collectively swung more than 6 feet. Climate scientists attribute the volatility to the interplay of rising temperatures and precipitation from more frequent and intense storms. Communities in the Great Lakes region expect to spend nearly $2 billion over the next 5 years combating coastal damage worsened by climate change. Wisconsin's expected share is about $245 million. Low waters in 2013 forced the Washington Island ferry line to move operations to deeper waters, costing up to $750,000. High water in 2020 swamped parts of the ferry landing and the island, leaving captains to contend with floating debris. Water also flooded the dock at Rock Island. A submerged dock and the pandemic forced the closure of Rock Island State Park much of last year. Weather primarily drives the lake's ebbs and flows, scientists say. Precipitation boosts water levels, while evaporation, which increases with warmer temperatures, drops them. The Great Lakes region is warming faster than most places in the country. That's tending to cause ice cover to form later each year, allowing more time for evaporation. Meanwhile, heavier rain and snow are coming from severe storms. These two factors create an increasingly powerful tug-of-war effect that scientists expect to bring more extreme lake level shifts. Shoreline erosion, and how to afford protections against damage from high water, challenges urban centers as well as small towns along the Great Lakes. In Sheboygan, preparing for the future means reinforcing breakwater areas and adding additional seawalls or riprap, said Mayor Ryan Sorensen. It also means planting native vegetation, which stabilizes bluff slopes and limits future erosion from powerful Lake Michigan waves. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has begun an analysis of the Door County Peninsula to help inform solutions. The agency has seen more permit requests to build barriers during high water and dredge during low water. Carr says property owners and communities should take action now, even with water levels dipping from 2020. It's much easier to do the work now than waiting until the water is lapping at the dock's edge, he said. For Wisconsin Watch, this is Mario Karan.
Hello, I'm Mario Karan. I want to thank everybody for coming. I know some of you had some good long drives, so appreciate everybody's time, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. First, I want to introduce our panelists, and for our panelists, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what connects you to this issue. And primarily today, we're talking about fluctuating lake levels. So on my right, let me introduce you first, and then we'll come back and allow you to introduce yourself. So on my right is Mayor Ryan Sorensen, Mayor of Sheboygan. He's also a board member of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. To his right is Mike Freese, Resource Policy Director at the Department of Administration. And on the right, to Mr. Freese's right is Tony Wilken-Gabart, Executive Director of Midwest Environmental Advocates. Mayor Ryan Sorensen, let's start with you. What connects you to the Great Lakes issue, and tell us some about your relationship to the Great Lakes?
Well, thank you first off, everybody, for attending. I think the thing that connects me to the Great Lakes is fundamentally I'm a Wisconsinite, born and raised in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Grew up, learning to swim and play on the beach and just interacting with Lake Michigan. In Sheboygan, the lake is fundamentally an identity of our community. Everybody knows Sheboygan is the Malibu of the Midwest. We're the #1 freshwater surf capital of the world. We have the largest freshwater fishing charters as well. So from every aspect of Sheboygan, the lake is identified with who we are as a community. So preserving it, protecting it, ensuring it that the resources are available for future generations to enjoy, like myself. That's a big motivation of why I got into the local office when I ran for mayor. One of my campaign issues was talking about addressing climate change and the impact that lakeshore erosion has on our community. So that's why I'm here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Mike.
So yeah, thanks. So I'm Mike Freese. I'm at the Department of Administration. There I manage 3 programs, including the Coastal Management Program. I think the Great Lakes are important to me because of the quality of life that they provide us as citizens of the state. They're part of our identity. They're part of our history. They add to the value of our life as well as the economics of the state. I feel like there's a little bit of me in every inch of the 1,000 miles of Great Lakes coastline we have, and whatever happens there is really important to me.
And Tony.
Yeah, great. Thanks everyone for being here. Tony Wilken-Gabart, Executive Director of Midwest Environmental Advocates. And like Ryan, I'm a native Wisconsinite and grew up near Lake Michigan. So for me, Lake Michigan is the lake and feel closely connected to it. MEA is a public interest environmental law center that works with Wisconsin communities to defend our rights to healthy water, land, and air. And so we've worked for our over 20-year history protecting and preserving the Great Lakes from issues like the Great Lakes Compact, the enactment and implementation of that law, to actions, here in Sturgeon Bay, working with the Friends of Sturgeon Bay Public Waterfront to defend public access to the Sturgeon Bay Greenery and ensure that public rights are protected. So our relationships with folks in this area, I know, from those relationships and even from your reporting, Mario, that folks in Door County and on the Door Peninsula have really close connections with the lake as well. And we're gonna be talking about, the balancing public and private rights and I'm going to offer some thoughts in that regard, but just want to say that I know that everyone here in this room and the folks that you've reported about are grappling with this really, really difficult issue. And I want to just put that out there, that anything that I say is about generalities and not about any particular issue or decision that property owners make. So I'm really looking forward to learning from the other panelists and from you, Mario, and having this great discussion.
Okay, thank you all. So we're going to jump right into questions, but I just want to remind you that everybody will have a chance to ask questions at the end. We certainly have a lot to learn as well, so we're looking forward to hearing from you. So to the panelists, I'm going to direct my questions to each person, but feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. Here, Sorensen, I'd like to start with you. Sheboygan has had to make some major modifications to its shoreline in recent years, both in high water and during low water. Can you summarize some of what the city has done and some of what the city has yet to do?
Yes. As I was saying before, the lakeshore is a huge identity of our community, and preserving that and adapting to the changes that climate change has on our community is pretty major. So a few things that we've done have both been kind of the physical attributes as well, reinforcing seawalls, breakwater components as well too. There have been some natural aspects as well, doing some beach restoration projects, making sure that planting native vegetation as well to reinstate or not reinstate, reinforce our lakeshore as well and our beaches to make sure that when the water does fluctuate, that there are those natural components to it as well. So the impact is not as severe. There's so much more that we could do because there's so many, obviously, when you're a local government, there's limitations what you can and can't do, and you have a lot of different regional partnerships that you have to work with. Regional partnerships is a big thing that I'm a strong advocate for as well too. Right now, we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to reinforce one of our breakwater piers just in our harbor as well, and that's a several $1 million project and always over schedule, over budget. 2 years behind on that one right now. I like to say that's the Army Corps' issue that they've presented on us, but we're working diligently with them. When you work on these projects, it's almost like overturning other rocks. You're finding more issues, more problems, so to say, that need to be addressed. Right now, we have major silting that is occurring right now in the mouth of our river, which impacts our fishing industry, our recreation as well that comes in the river. So those are some of the components that we're seeing right now. Long-term planning. This has why I've been a big component of the infrastructure package that Congress and President Biden are working on right now. Municipalities are pretty constrained right now in terms of going at it alone. So we need those regional partnerships with the state government, with the federal government, so that we can have increased physical infrastructure to reinforce property owners, public access areas, businesses, and for the public to enjoy as well too. So that's just a little bit of what we're doing.
Right. Anything to add, Mike?
Well, the mayor touched on the softer approaches, sort of the green infrastructure, which is great to see. Sometimes those approaches can themselves be more expensive, but what doesn't always take into account in sort of the economics of those approaches is the ecosystem services that some of those things provide. Probably maybe reduce maintenance cost, the ecological value, water quality benefits that those may. So, and I commend the mayor and other Wisconsin communities that are going to that extra mile to do those sorts of things.
And to that point too, it might be a higher cost up front,
Right.
but in the long term, you're
Right.
a lot more savings.
Exactly.
As well.
Mhm.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we'll be talking about, over the course of the evening is the upfront costs of trying to preserve structures and install engineered solutions versus natural solutions and restoring natural habitat, which can make coastlines more resilient in the long run.
And I think one of the pictures in the video also just kind of had a good example of our riverfront as well. I think Mike and I were just kind of talking about before, in 2013, you were mentioning comments how the lake levels were very low, but we right now we're having extremely high water. And when Lake Michigan is high, the Sheboygan River, and a lot of our businesses, which are very close to the mouth, see that impact as well too. And in the picture in the video, you could just see how high it was. And in the summer and spring, when snow is melting and it's raining, we just have businesses throwing out sandbags and doing what they can just to fend off the water. And that's just a very immediate reaction that a lot of storefronts along the riverfront see and experience every day. And one large rain event is a way just for making or breaking their livelihoods. So it's something that is very emotional and very impactful for businesses and homeowners and everyone alike in our community. So,
Thank you. Mike, I have a question for you. Let's talk lake level fluctuations a little bit. Give us a sense of how big they are, how they compare to historical trends.
So yeah, Lake Michigan can see fluctuations of up to 6 feet. As we mentioned, I was here at Crossroads in 2013 talking about low lake levels. People concerned about dredging, about invasive species growing up on exposed lake beds, piers that ended on dry land. And we talked about the things that people could do. Adaptive management was something that we talked a lot about, accommodating those changes. I joked before I dropped the mic at every meeting we had that year. So I said, but just wait, it's going to change. And it did change. And no one expected it to change quite as quickly as it did from 13 to 2020 when we saw those increases. But I think that, the big message is, be prepared, things change. Sometimes our memories are short too. We may build too close to the shore, may be allowed to, according to our zoning ordinances, but we've forgotten what it was like just a few years ago. I would encourage people who haven't taken a chance to look at, the Army Corps of Engineers provides tables and graphs on their webpage about water levels and provides projections of water levels. And I don't know if this might be time to sort of talk about sort of the seasonality of the changes. And I did provide a slide. I don't know if it's up there right now. Okay. So you can sort of see, when you see the net outflow and inflow. One of the things that this doesn't, I think, present well enough is in the winter when we don't see periods of ice cover. The amount of evaporation that comes off the Great Lakes is just tremendous. If you think about all that surface area and all the water that can be lost. And I think back to that period when the lakes jumped up from 13 to 20. I remember, I think it was 2013, I was in Superior and I heard that the ice caves were open for the first time in the Paso Islands. And that was a year that, 14 was very cold. Superior, Michigan saw a lot of ice cover. So it sort of put a damper on that amount of evaporation that we saw. So it's really these seasonalities, these inflows and outflows, whether rainfall, snow, ice cover, really play into lake levels.
If I could ask, we're going to save it to the end, but definitely put a marker in there for my car. If I could ask just one quick follow-up question to that. Reporting and talking to people that live and work along the shoreline, wide disparity in perspectives of what causes this, right? Sometimes lakes go up, sometimes they go down, but to what extent can we think about climate change as playing a role?
Well, I think that we're seeing some, tremendous variations in weather. We're 2016 and Lake Superior Basin was essentially a drought year, except for 2 huge rain events that had a tremendous impact on the transportation infrastructure up there. Those sorts of events also lead to things like harmful algal blooms, because you get this big rush of nutrients that come off the landscape, in one big flush. So certainly the way the seasons are changing, the ice cover, it all plays into it. And what climate change means to lake levels, I'm not sure that there's enough data points, but certainly it looks like it means greater fluctuations.
Anything to add, Ryan or Tony?
Yeah, and I think definitely echo what Mike is saying too. You know, we're having the higher highs, lower lows in a much more compact time frame too. And I think folks in Sheboygan, you know, we're from my perspective, we're kind of past the political finger pointing out. Is this climate change? Is this, you know, cyclical, seasonal? Folks in our community realize, okay, well, this is happening. This is the reality. What are we going to do about it? What are the steps that we're going to take to protect our lake shore from the impact? Whether you think it's climate change or you think it's seasonal, folks see that it's happening and it's happening more severely. So it's a very pressing issue. Democrats and Republicans both reached out and work with me constantly. We talk about the issues that are going on in our community regarding stuff like this.
Well, you know, one thing that we pay attention to at MEA is around, you know, what the Army Corps and especially DNR is doing in their regulatory programs. And there's actually, of course, a seasonality to that as well. And so the systems that we have set up to oversee erosion control structures and the placement of infrastructure, it rises and falls with the seasons. And, you know, we've seen over the course of the last decade now, how when lake levels are getting higher, especially in the warmer months, when these issues are occurring, that those systems can become overwhelmed. And, you know, it then becomes difficult for property owners and for the rest of us to ensure that these resources are being protected. So these cycles play out in, you know, lots of different spheres, and something that we need to grapple with.
Tony, I'd like to bring the next question back over to you. Your organization submitted comments to the Department of Natural Resources, or DNR, as part of the strategic planning process to determine what, if anything, should be done in response to the wildly swinging lake levels. I'm wondering if you could summarize some of your concerns or some of what you submitted to.
Yeah. So first, just to give a little bit of context, what DNR is undertaking is a strategic analysis of the Door Peninsula shoreline. And DNR does this when it's facing issues of this scale, right? Where an issue like rising and falling lake levels touches on many different aspects of what the department is doing, many different regulatory programs, permitting processes, and tries to take a holistic view of the issue and gain at least a common set of data and understanding that can guide all of those different programs. And so right now, that process is really just at an initial stage. It's at the stage when DNR has asked stakeholders like MEA, but also members of the public to weigh in on what should be covered in that strategic analysis. And that's what we commented on. There will be further opportunities for members of the public to weigh in on what the plan or the analysis should say itself. So stay tuned for that. But in our initial comments about the strategic analysis, one of our main themes was to make sure that DNR gives predominant concern and attention to the fact that when we're managing the lakeshore, we are talking about the public's right to that resource. And so it's in our state constitution. It's part of our heritage and part of our rights as the citizens of the state of Wisconsin, that the state has an affirmative obligation to manage the waterways for our benefit. And so when we talk about what we're seeing here, right, erosion and high lake levels abutting private property, we're really seeing public and private rights come into at least relationship with one another. And so, our comments to the DNR were to just give adequate attention to the fact that in all of its actions, it should be thinking about its affirmative constitutional obligation to manage those resources in the public trust. And of course, to think about the cumulative impact of different decisions. And that's, one of the issues that your reporting, Mario, has touched on, is that it's simple physics that when more and more structures go into the water, that there's greater and greater likelihood that erosive action, that kinetic energy, is getting dispersed and causing problems along the shoreline. And so it's really important that DNR pay attention to the cumulative impacts. And then, of course, to think about all of these impacts in relationship to the habitat, both fisheries and wildlife that are impacted when we're changing the nature of the shoreline. So that's just an initial stage, and like I said, there'll be plenty of opportunities for public input as that process plays out. But I'm glad that DNR is taking a holistic view of this issue because it certainly deserves it.
Anything to add, Ryan or Mike?
I would just like to echo that, when we're dealing with the shoreline, we're dealing with a system and understanding closer processes. And that's what my program, along with the UWC Grant Institute, is trying to do. We're updating the Great Lakes Coastal Processes Guide, which was last updated in the 90s. It's used across the Great Lakes to understand processes and evaluate the cumulative impacts of one management decision at one spot relative to what it could do to neighboring properties. As well as we've been successful as a program working collaboratively with Sea Grant and the Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission on a regional coastal resiliency project. I should point out that for those here, I put I guess a two-sided one-pager back there about the resiliency work that we've been doing through the Coastal Management Program in collaboration, primarily with UWC Grant. So, but yeah, and working with those people who have to make those permitting decisions, who are, I did it. I worked in water regulations at a time. It's a hard job. These people care about the resource, and sometimes you've got to make sure that you're looking and managing for a resource and not for a single site. And I commend them for their work.
I'm sure that we have some homeowners in the audience and may be curious as to how this impacts you. So I'd like to hear from you certainly after the panel. Moving to the next question. Mayor Sorensen, you're active with Great Lakes mayors on a variety of issues. What types of concerns are you hearing from other mayors who are along the coastline as it relates to lake levels? And what are your main concerns?
Yes, so I'm as it was stated in my opening, I'm on the board of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. So that is an international coalition of mayors from the United States and Canada that surround the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. And it's in all of the above kind of alarm bells going off in terms of lake issues right now. Definitely the biggest thing that we're talking about is the impact of climate change and lakeshore erosion that's happening. We see the news reports from homes falling into the lake down in Kenosha. We see algae blooms occurring, I think, up in the Marinette Pesco area as well. We're seeing different shipping lanes, I think, in terms of river areas in Manitowoc. So we see the impact that lakeshore erosion is having all over the not Sheboygan. We're seeing erosion, but all the other types of issues impacting every waterfront community as well. One of our biggest concerns, the biggest priorities right now is just the cost of all this, whether it's the impact that it's having economically on us, or it's the cost of how we mitigate and try to prevent these issues from escalating in the future as well. When you talk about whether it's a physical type of infrastructure project, if you only have a few, I'll just use, everyone always says, we need more riprap. We need more riprap when water gets high. And to some extent, yes, we need some more riprap. But to Mike's point too, it's, that's just only one part of the component of the equation. When you talk about the natural type of resources that it takes, or the natural infrastructure that you put into to reinforce parts of the city, parts of the slope, beaches as well. There's a cost to that too, and it doesn't have a greater impact when the city of Sheboygan goes it alone and tries to address these issues, or the village of Cleveland or Green Bay, whatever it is. There needs to be comprehensive regional planning. There needs to be state efforts as well. And right now, cities are strapped. We just voted on our budget at the city council last this past Monday. And, cities like Sheboygan, we're not, as big as Milwaukee or Chicago by any means. And we're pretty strapped at cash. And when we want a big project that costs a couple $1 million, we just simply don't have that. And it's difficult to raise property taxes for a big project like this already when you need to maintain other services as well. So just making the pitch, big proponent of the infrastructure package that's going as well. Hopefully that will have some climate change initiatives included in there. So communities like Sheboygan and other communities all across Wisconsin and the Great Lakes can really tackle some of these. So that was kind of a rambly response, but all the above cost of impact implementation too. And these aren't issues that you can just flip a switch and fix overnight. You have to have solid planning. You need to make sure that what you're doing is impactful for the long term and preserving natural resources for future generations. So it's a very big, complex issues. And being the youngest mayor in Wisconsin, it's no stress at all. As I was joking. So,
Well, one thing I want to add, and it's a thread that I want to make sure is part of this conversation, or relates to what Ryan was just talking about in terms of local governments being proactive. One of the things that we've seen over the last several years is changes in state laws that make it more difficult for local governments to use their zoning authority to be proactive and to get ahead of these issues and to do land use planning for the future, so that they're not confronted with having to reinforce shoreline years and years and decades into the future because they've made smart decisions when they're thinking about what they're constructing and what they're allowing on the land. And so I think we need more local leaders like Ryan, and we need them empowered with regulatory tools to do what's right for their communities and their regions. And that's going to require changes at the legislature.
I think the point of being strategic is key, particularly when a community is looking for those sorts of funding sources that have deeper pockets than I might have. So I think like the FEMA's brick program, building resilient infrastructure in communities, sort of setting the stage and providing communities with the resources to think strategically and incorporate adaptive management is something that my program has been trying to do. One of the programs I manage is the state's comprehensive planning program. We don't give out grants for that any longer, but we do support comprehensive planning within Great Lakes coastal communities for the coastal management program. And with our Southeast Wisconsin Coastal Resiliency Project, we worked with the 24 municipalities, including the 4 counties there, to do self-assessments, and then funded planning projects that identified the needs there, with the hope that we were setting the stage for them to capture some of those bigger pots of funding to deal with their issues, whether it's the infrastructure bill or FEMA's brick funding.
All right. I'm going to move along because I want to make sure that we have some time to hear from the audience. This question's for Mike. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what sort of strategies we're seeing along the shoreline to mitigate the impact of high water levels?
Well, I think the closest example I can point to is the experiences we've had in the 4 Southeast Wisconsin counties through our regional coastal resiliency project. There we worked with those communities on doing the self-assessments, and it was a community of practice where they could come together and share experiences and talk about a regional approach to address that. And I would encourage anybody to pick up this one pager I put in the back of the room. We also have a web page for that project. We have guides for lakeshore homeowners and discussions about beaches, port infrastructure, bluffs. So those are the approaches that we've taken. Also looking at the flooding issues, whether it's storm surges in the East River and Green Bay, or the flooding that we saw in the Lake Superior Basin in 2016 and 18. We have a project of special merit looking at the road infrastructure, in particular culverts, and helping communities and county highway commissioners on assessing their culvert inventory, understanding why a culvert failed, building resiliency into that when they can. You know, sometimes FEMA only pays for what was there, but when can you build and accommodate for greater water flow to sustain your road infrastructure? Also has a side benefit of some of these culverts were too small for fish passage. If you know the south shore of Lake Superior, particularly the Shoreline Bay area, it's a high quality trout fishery as well. So it's really, we're accommodating two resource concerns right there. You know, really, their communities are working together on there. I co-chair the Great Lakes Regional Maritime Entity for the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Governors Premiers Group. We're talking about port infrastructure. Certainly, you know, flooding is something I guess we haven't talked that much about, but you know, Green Bay sees it, our Lake Superior Basin sees it. So, you know, adaptive management, accommodating those changes, understanding what different sorts of rainfall regimens and durations and frequencies that we're going to be seeing, and building that into your community's plan. Your comprehensive plan is essentially your community's business plan. So, in setting the stage for them to capture more funding to address those changes. That was kind of rambling as well.
Tony or Mayor Sorensen, anything to add to that?
You guys are trying to figure out what I said.
Comprehensive planning, absolutely, and zoning authority to be able to enforce it and carry it out if it's necessary. So, but yeah, great response.
Okay, let's bring this to homeowners. So Tony, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the legal framework for shoreline mitigation. And what can property owners do on their own? And what must they do in order to get approval?
Sure. So speaking really at a high level of generality, I mean, I already talked about the fact that the state's obligation to manage what goes in the lake bed is grounded in the state constitution and the public trust doctrine. And the way the state does that is through Chapter 30 and of the state statutes. And, you know, there are kind of two tracks. There's a general permitting track where if you're adhering to certain standards, when you're placing riprap or taking other less intense actions, you don't need an individual permit. And you probably should ask Mike this question since he's the one who did it. I'm thinking about it as he's sitting here next to me. But, you know, for more intensive installations, there's an individual permitting process. And that's where DNR requires the submission of plans related to what the homeowner wants to do, and takes a look at, you know, that particular location on an individualized basis and whether that's the appropriate solution for that location. And again, that's really important because we're balancing lots of different interests here. We're balancing the private property interests with ecological interests and, you know, the interests of neighboring properties as well. And I'll just say that, you know, again, because we've seen such severe issues on this cyclical basis, that that process has kind of become overwhelmed, as I alluded to earlier. And last year, DNR had to set up an entire separate track where homeowners were using what they call a self-certification process, where if the homeowner agreed to adhere to certain standards, they would forego temporarily that individual permitting process. And the homeowner could take emergency measures and then agree to apply for a permit retroactively. That, you know, under the circumstances was maybe necessary, but there were definitely some problems because while many homeowners needed that, you know, relief and that speedy action from DNR, there were others that took advantage of it. And so I think as we're talking about investing in infrastructure, we're talking about local collaborations, we also need to remember that we need to fund the folks who are looking out for the public interest and looking out for all of us so that they can handle that kind of influx and that they can be responsive to homeowners, because it really should be a collaboration on that level between the state and the homeowner to find the right solution. But when DNR is getting requests for permits that are, you know, 5 times what their normal rate is, and they're not even able to do a cursory review before they say, yep, you can go ahead and build because this is an emergency, we're not going to get to those solutions. And, we've seen such drastic cuts at DNR over the course of the last decade, more than any other state in terms of investments in environmental protection. That's part of what we really need to be paying attention to as well, so that homeowners can get the response that they need, so that we ensure that the public trust is being upheld. I'll also just briefly allude to the fact that the Army Corps is involved in certain situations, and there are local regulations. So homeowners and property owners have to work with all levels of government.
The homeowners love it when they get to work with many different.
Yeah, I know. So that's the reality of it. And then I think you asked a little bit about what homeowners who are impacted by erosion that might be the result of structures that went in and maybe weren't designed appropriately. There is precedent for private lawsuits, nuisance lawsuits in those situations. Of course, that really should be a last resort, and that is why it's really important that DNR have the ability to work with homeowners and ensure that we're not confronting situations like that. And then there is what's a citizen suit provision of Chapter 30, where someone has installed something that was not permitted or not to standards, that another private individual can sue to enforce the standards of the statute. So there are some options, but of course we don't want it to get to that level.
Mike, anything to add?
Well, yeah, I should have looked at your questions too. I could have. So I could say that. So my program worked collaboratively with DNR and Sea Grant to provide and send out postcards to every lakefront property owner in certain counties where they were experiencing high volumes of permit requests, to lay out the process, to give them, point them towards resources of things that they could use. And it was a great collaboration between my land information program that has the state's parcel database, where we could pull out land ownership and mailing addresses. And then we came together with DNR, Sea Grant, Wisconsin Emergency Management, and put together a postcard that we funded and sent out to the property owners within those areas to give them some guidance, because people want to know, by and large, I believe people want to do the right thing, and then provide a heads up for DNR staff on where they needed to work.
Yeah, and I'll say that self-certification process in the last 6 months has really improved after that postcard went out, and now DNR is able to do some more individualized analysis and kind of sort out what are really exigent emergencies versus situations that can go through the normal permitting process.
Yeah. And working with DNR staff too, making them aware of the resources that are available to them through both my land information program and the coastal management program. One of the things that we've done is we've flown the coast for the oblique photography for the last couple of years. One thing that's really interesting is it gives you anecdotal information on bluff erosion. And then also, it could provide people with information, in terms of where they might anticipate permits, where there might be capital investments that are in jeopardy. So sort of be proactive and work with folks that may have issues.
And I just kind of wanted to add just another level of this too. From being in the public official side, there's always this public education or public education component that is always missing. We have a lot of homes on Bluff in Sheboygan, and they see the high water levels, and they kind of start panicking, and they say, "Oh, we need more riprap. We need more riprap." It might be part of it, but a difficult part that they don't understand is right now. I might jump in if I'm getting a little off topic here, but currently we have in the Sheboygan area, we have the water tables are increasing significantly as well. There's a lot of invasive plants that have eroded or don't necessarily stabilize the bluff, and then coupled on top of that, you have the high water from the lakes that kind of exacerbate the erosion. So it's this equation that sort of really makes homes and businesses alike kind of put in peril, essentially. So to Tony's point too, just making sure that you have that level of zoning and planning tied on top of that so that you can prevent situations from just essentially getting a lot worse. So it's this multi-level component that individuals in the community do need to understand, that when you're solving these complex parts of it, that there's different levels and there's different factors that make the situation much more challenging as well.
Okay. Well, I know that we have a lot of expertise and knowledge and experience in the audience, so I want to make sure to give you the floor, a chance to ask questions.
I'm also going to tell you that I do have a few questions that have come in online as well that I'm going to share with you. And I also want to let people who are in the room know that we can take a deeper dive after the panel is concluded, and we'll have some snacks and refreshments. Sorry, folks online. So just to have that in mind. So I don't know if you want to trade off between in the room questions and what we have online.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start with Mr. Carr. Mr. Carr is, who I happened to meet in my reporting trip, owner of Death Store Marine, contractors worked on the shore for 40 years. So, sorry.
You got one.
Okay, there you go.
My project's right up there.
So yes, I know that you had a question, so fire away.
I got a bunch of questions. I've been doing this a while. First off, department engineer. Nice, they're all predicated on weather. In the year 2000, when the water dropped, first time, that was the steepest recorded drop on record. Corps of Engineer reports were so far out, did not catch that at all. It caught a lot of people, a lot of municipalities. I was inundated with dredging requests, and it was just really pandemonium. And part of the problem I've learned is that because they can't predict it as well, you have to be adaptable, and it makes it difficult for municipalities, anyone using the water, to foresee into the future and plan into the future. They don't have good forecasting available. And I've seen forecasting very flawed because they can't predict the weather. Even with global warming, it's getting worse because of these trends in the weather. It's really, really making it difficult for entities, any entity on the water, trying to predict it and budget. We talked about budgeting and everything. So it's kind of, you know, I really feel for a lot of people trying to plan for this and budget for it. So, I've got other things to it.
Anybody? If no one has a question, we can jump to an audience question, but feel free to raise your hand. You, sir.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Miles from the call. Nobody mentioned this, but in my car, maybe you know more about this, but if anybody's done forecast or analysis of this, but when the International Commission came out with a report on the low levels 10 years ago, one of their conclusions was that the water would be 12 to 18 inches higher now had the Army Corps never dredged the St. Clair River. So that they said that accounted for about 12 to 18 inches of the drop potentially. So I wonder if anyone's gone back and factored that into like where the lake levels would have been over the years had we added those 12 to 18 inches at any given moment. Can you imagine that 12 to 18 more inches last year basically means almost every year in Door County is underwater. Not mistaken, like I mean, they were all pretty much right at the top last year. So we're kind of in a way lucky that dredging happened, which 12 to 18 years ago, we were all furious with the thing, this dredging with St. Clair River, and wanted to, take some measures to fill that back in. So,
Well, that was actually Sturgeon Bay hired Air
Yeah.
to do some independent study aside from the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers denied anything about it, but Air confirmed as an engineering that the lake level was in fact dramatically lower at 12 to 18. And because of that, because of the, it was actually just current in the river that actually made it a lot deeper. It's towered the bottom.
So my understanding is the dredging occurred, there was authority to put in a water control structure, weir, there that was never appropriated. But also that wouldn't account for the changes that we saw in Lake Superior because Lake Superior is controlled with the locks and dams on the St. Mary's River. So I'm not sure that that study is well-founded, universally. I'm dusting off my memory on that one, but yeah.
I think that was what they cited in that final report.
And from Baird, I don't know if it was IJC.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and I just want to also remind people in the audience to speak up when they're asking a question. But we do have a question from the audience. Tony referred to affirmative constitutional obligation, which sounds like a way to understand the relative balancing of individual property owner versus municipalities versus the entire state's population rights or interest in the lakes. Could he explain that a little more?
Sure. So the text of our state constitution, guarantees that the navigable waters of the state are held in trust for the public's benefit. And so that means that while the state has lots of policy choices that it can make through the legislature and through the DNR, and at the end of the day, it is constitutionally obligated to preserve the public's interest in navigable waters. And of course, that includes Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. So it's a background legal principle and obligation that the state has, and it needs to be thought about and central to all of these discussions that we're having when we are balancing and trying to find a way to resolve and uphold various competing interests. It doesn't mean that that is always going to determine what the state does, because there is a wide range of policy choices that the state can make. But it is again a constitutional obligation that the state has and should run through everything that it's doing. So that was the main point that I wanted to make, but I hope that resolves the question.
Tony, I wonder if you could just add a little bit to that. I'm wondering where, when we're talking about waters here and we're talking about moving beaches, where does the state's responsibility begin and where does it end?
Yeah, I mean, generally it's at the ordinary high water mark, which is something that is that DNR determines based on historic lake levels. But when we're talking about erosion control structures, those are necessarily always going below the ordinary high water mark into the lake bed. And so that's why the state's obligations with respect to public trust responsibilities are really at the heart of what the state is doing.
Part of the problem I have with the state.
Can you speak up a little bit? I'm sorry.
We have no master plan for facilities. Look at that picture up there. That's my part. We're doing work on the private shoreline. It's been quoted on that particular shoreline about cumulative impacts of too many docks. Okay, people are building their own docks because there's no public facilities in the state. We have no master plan for public facilities. You go over to Michigan, they've got master plans and they've exceeded. They wanted to have a safe harbor every 20 miles. They've exceeded that. Now they're going every 10 miles. We have no plans in the state or even in this county. I get frustrated because property becomes available for public access. It's almost like a scramble at the last minute to get the property. Pebble Beach is a perfect example. There's property in Fish Creek right now that's being decided on, and that has to go to the voters, but there's no state help. We have no state overall plan of trying to satiate the demand for public for access to the water. And it's frustrating to see that. And I see opportunities in Door County, and I've been trying to not develop them, but just say, hey, from a construction standpoint, Gills Rock is a perfect place to have something. Ellison Bay is another place to have something. But the problem is the private entities, the smaller communities are trying to do this themselves, and they don't have the expertise to do it at all. Or the funding doesn't allow it. Funding only funds the structure, it doesn't the outside structure, it doesn't do anything to the inside. So these monstrosities being built that builds stone quarry or anything, but there's no slips in it or anything, but it's not funded by the state. So our overall concept of public trust and everything is inherently flawed in the state. It's frustrating. It really does.
I should say that there is a planning process, and it's a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan the state goes through on a regular basis. And those are good points to make. So that evidently there's a disconnect there. And then the state went through a land legacy report, which was meant to identify properties or characterize properties for acquisition. So, and thanks for mentioning Pebble Beach because I helped fund that. So, and
I felt they, built immediately. It was only because the zoning was wrong, they were able to buy it, but I mean, it's just. But there's nothing between Sturgeon Bay and Bailey's Harbor, nothing. I've identified property in Whitefish Dune State Park, it can very easily be done, and, it's like knocking on, no one answers the door.
I think that we're seeing an interesting shift too. And just a shameless plug, our annual publication for my coastal management programs in the back to the Wisconsin Great Lakes Chronicle, as well as a compendium of past episodes or editions. So you're free to take those. And if you run out, let me know. But the pandemic, I just noted as a recreational user of the outdoors and a consumptive user, I noticed, going to a specialty store, a big box store, kayaks were gone. There's no canopy of fishing poles at Fleet Farm anymore. So people were finding a way to entertain themselves during the pandemic. And I saw it, whether it was at a boat landing in the Madison Chain of Lakes, paddling down the Kickapoo River, or up in the Apostle Islands. People were getting outside. So I don't know if this is going to change. We're going to see people dropping out, but that's why things, people like you need to provide input into things like that.
I helped open Rock Island State Park. I worked with them since January, February of this year, trying to come up with solutions so they could get it open. People want to use state park, especially with the
And then
Rock Island was closed last.
And the long,
That was a
I
challenge.
know, but the
Really
long-term
was.
planning too, the comprehensive outdoor recreation plans, that's a requirement of the state and counties to receive certain pots of funding. So I know I've funded county outdoor recreation plans. So that's, really being strategic in how they use. And as a funder, I want to make sure if I provide somebody some dollars, that they're strategic in their approach to them. That they're
I would love to be a participant in Door County and for all of these structures, kayak, beaches, landings, marinas. Identify now as property becomes available, so it's not a last minute.
True. I can't speak for if there was a disconnect, but there is now. So I would encourage anybody.
Thank you. I don't need to cut you short. I just know that we have.
We have several questions here, and we have several in the audience as well. So if we could just try to share a little bit of that space, that'd be great.
Sure.
I've got one quick one for you that Mike can just tell me. Can you just tell us the website you're referring to? Because there's people online that don't have this flyer.
Okay, so if they would just Google Southeast Wisconsin Regional, which is regional resiliency.
Is it Southeast with coastal resilience?
Southeast Wisconsin Coastal Resiliency. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I
I
think
can
the
use that
URL
in
is
the chat.
pretty easy,
Okay.
but it escapes my mind.
Okay. And then you had a couple over here, then I have a couple back.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I haven't seen it. Go ahead.
I know that the county in the past has tried to purchase property.
Can you speak up? I'm sorry.
Okay, I know that, property is trying to purchase property between Gales Harbor and Sturgeon Bay in the past. But there's also something that happens, which is property owners can get together, buy the property at a much higher cost, something that a municipality or a county cannot afford. And this is where, to Mike's point, I think having some overall planning and some support from the state. Because when it comes right down to it, there's an awful lot of not in my backyard that we have to deal with. And we don't have the budgets to go ahead and just do things. I mean, I'm now in the city of Sturgeon Bay, we put our money out there and we reinforced everything within the city. And we have a lot of shoreline in the city that wasn't protected. And we've got one last small portion to do, but we did that. There was no funding, no help with any of that. We had to transfer money from one project that we had that we probably would never complete to reinforce our shoreline. It would be nice to have, I guess, at least recognition for, and I realize funding is tight all the way down the line, but if this is this big of a problem, funding is an important thing.
Can you relate to that?
You're here, so,
Infrastructure bill.
yeah, infrastructure bill. Build back better, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Having wetlands that are operative and how the impact, how does that play into the mitigating the damage from the swings? And do you know of any entity or funding source that's looking at like where are the lost wetlands and how could you kind of recreate the important ones by purchasing property when it's available or trying to recreate what used to be there that ends up doing a lot of the work that costs money if you don't have it?
That's a great question.
I think a good example might be what we've seen in Milwaukee with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Schools District. They have a green seams program where they went out and they found property that had hydric soils, formerly converted wetlands, purchased the property, and then in a lot of cases restored the wetlands for their functional values of floodwater retention. They were focused that in particular in their combined sewer service area. And then we've been working with Wisconsin Wetlands Association, the Association of State Floodplain Managers, and Iron County to sort of take that concept on a watershed basis and looking at wetland restoration activities in the Lake Superior Basin with the idea of what would that have done to alleviate the impacts from those big floods in 2016 and 18. And then, certainly you get, that's the ecosystem services of restoration activities. They may save you money in the long run. They provide floodwater retention. They capture sedimentation, so it's a water quality benefit, and there's a habitat benefit to them as well.
So we have another question that was, Tony talked about the importance of the state legislature not limiting the tools local government can use. Are there specific legislative acts that are interfering rather than supporting shoreline flooding remediation?
I mean, certainly in 2015 and 2017, bills were passed by the state legislature that limited what counties could do in their shoreline zoning ordinances. So that's one of the tools that, is less powerful to deal with this issue. For many decades, kind of the guiding principle behind shoreline zoning policy was that non-conforming structures would be phased out over time, but through these legislative changes, we've kind of stood that on its head. And there, is now more of an emphasis on preserving structures that maybe cannot sustainably be on the shoreline with the kinds of erosive activity that we're seeing. So again, I think we need a comprehensive approach and we need local governments to be empowered to implement solutions that work for their communities. And that's where we took a step backwards.
Part of that legislation that really hurt was this locality or local government can now not have more strict regulations than this. Local government cannot now have stricter regulations than the state regulations. So York County, for instance, had to go through and rewrite many of their zoning. Shoreline zoning regulations,
right, yeah.
because we were stricter than the state.
The state has set a ceiling that counties like Door County cannot go above to be more proactive and protective of the shoreline.
Or we'd like to say non-conforming structures, if an owner wants to take some of his own money, make the structure, sometimes the structures are falling down, things like that. And the whole concept of typically was 50% of the assessed value. Well, that's a 50% of what, that's open for interpretation. Now, for instance, things like boathouses can actually be rebuilt, and if the owner wants to stick money into it to make it better, where it was falling down before, sometimes that's not such a bad thing if that option is available to him.
Yeah, lots of trade-offs, right? But then I think the issue is that you have structures that are non-conforming, they're too close to the shoreline, and then we have to build, more and more seawalls to make sure that those structures then don't fall into the lake. And so at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, can those structures sustainably be that close to a changing shoreline? And that's one of the issues that we're confronting. Yeah, a big issue.
Nothing more.
Good.
Hi, kind of myopic question, but we have a family cottage we've had for 60 years. And I think it was December of 2019 when we had maybe 30 of our 40 feet of vegetative sand dunes sucked out, along with 10 of our 15 sections of our pier missing. And almost succumbed to the panic. Sand Bay, Riley's Bay, Little Sturgeon Bay, riprap, I can do that for $35,000 for your 100 feet of shoreline. Well, we didn't do it, and we were really glad we didn't do it. Now the water's all gone down, and we're okay, let's go back our little sand dune again with our vegetation. But at the end of your video, you said, do something now. I mean, is this going to come back to haunt us? Should we, now that the panic's over, maybe now some of the prices gouging has come down? Do we now put up what I don't want, a rock wall that looks terrible and will be there forever?
Right. It's a great
Because
question.
I'm planning for 7 years from now or 8 years from
Well, I
now.
mean, I know, I don't know about your particular situation, but you are doing something now, right? You're regrowing the natural vegetation that will.
Got sucked out in one storm in December 2019.
Right. I mean, so that is something that I think what I would, amend to the statement in Mario's video is doing something now might mean consulting with a coastal engineer and working with contractors, not the people who are gonna gouge you out, but reputable outfits that, will consider vegetative options and bioengineered options or riprap, so that you can get answers about what really makes sense for you and is in alignment with your values.
And so it's like, this neighborhood has riprap, this one doesn't, this one does. And the ones that do, were like right next to us, what looked like it was like a mountain of rocks. The sand has come up. And now it's like, oh, that's not a very hard rock wall because the sand has come up so much.
Right. It is,
I can't
that's
figure
one
it
of the definitely the conundrums is that.
But if I may, as a contractor, last year was a struggle for everyone on the water, including myself and my company. I've been doing this a long time. I have arrangements with all the quarries that get stone, typically as a byproduct. But last year, it was all gone. And it took a long time for the quarries to figure out how to produce the stone locally. I can get stone hauled, and I can get stone hauled in from Wausau cheaper than I could get it done locally. But now because of the less demand, the stone prices are going down. It's available. And the other thing too is the water sound. So now instead of a panic, now we can walk equipment on the shoreline, things like that, and it's not, it's not underwater. And I just because of the unknowns of this, and I told Mario to put that in there. Do it now while it's easier to do it. Because no one knows where it's going to go when it goes again. It will go up again, and then it's going,
Oh, we have one question back here. Thank you.
And that is my question exactly. I live in the same area as you do, so I'm very familiar. What homeowners need, and not just, I'm not on the water, but I'm, close enough. We need data. We need to know the impact that the neighbor's riprap is having on fish habitat, on whatever. I don't know that there's good information coming. The pulse is here. Thank you. I mean, there are limited places where we can get good information about, is this really a beneficial thing? The riprap in this Riley's Bay Sand Bay area, it's astonishing now. And clearly that's gonna have an impact on the current and on erosion somewhere else. I used to live on the Illinois River. You know, whatever the Corps of Engineers did here, of course, did untold damage there. And they're still figuring that out. And I don't know that we have good information that dumping riprap. And 35,000, good grief, I think that neighborhood had spent 225,000 on the shoreline. So we need information. We don't have information about what is the impact of that kind of, what kinds of plantings can we do?
That's a great point. Tony?
Well, I mean, I don't have a great answer, other than I think the Door County strategic assessment that I referred to earlier is an attempt by DNR to prioritize what information they need to gather. And so I would just encourage folks to participate in that and bring those issues to the assessment process and to explain how valuable they would be to you as homeowners who are, again, you know, trying to like balance, hold everything in balance and not necessarily just armor the shoreline, how you need that kind of information.
The Banda Aceh tsunami that killed 250,000 people, I heard that characterized, this was not a natural disaster. Of course, there was a 9.3 earthquake, but it was a man-made disaster because the mangroves had been ripped out. And people had populated areas that really couldn't support human population. It's interesting though that now, almost 20 years later, you can't just regrow a mangrove. I mean, this is a long and costly just to get them to regrow, to try. And there's been a lot of international funding because of the magnitude of that horrific tsunami. And these are not quick and easy things, as you have alluded to. This is really complicated to use natural types of alternatives to just loading and engineering. And don't get me wrong, I was married to an engineer for 40 years, so I appreciate what he said.
I would like to know more about the natural plantings and what would be good, not to try to reestablish or just.
Mangroves probably would be a good.
Yeah, I'd suggest visiting the coastal resiliency webpage, because there's information for landowners on there. So so I've got, so that's on the back of the room.
Anything except for a light.
Yes, right. Or reed canary grass.
The ice
Right.
really screws up some of the bioengineering stuff. So there's logic in using rock at the bottom and then using
Right.
only up to a certain elevation. And then going beyond that, use planting. The combination to makes a lot of sense in our neck of the woods.
So I'm getting a signal that it's time to wrap up this portion and we're gonna move to breakout groups. But I wonder if everybody can join me in thanking our panelists for making this happen.